Okay, so we are back to chat all about hormones, our little hormone chats. And this week, let me intro, sorry. So I'm Dr. Heather Rhodes, holistic pharmacist, and Leisha Drews is here too. Tell me how you say what your title is again.
Functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner.
Functional
I
diagnostic.
like to keep it really long.
Yes, for real. And a nurse, right? You are an NP too, right? Yeah. Super cool. So we are going to chat today. So we've been kind of doing this series all about just chatting about hormones. How do we make it simple for women to understand them? Basically, like things that we should have learned when we went through, I feel like high school sex ed, learning like,
high school.
Yeah, like as soon as you started having a period, you should have known what that means and how your body works and what that essentially influences, which is everything around your entire body. And we've started specifically with kind of debunking or just diving deeper into specific diet trends. And our plan is to keep going into other things, specifically about different things that are influencing your cycle. So we have plans to chat about iron, about estrogen dominance, about low progesterone, about fertility, even some of the period secrets and myths and all those things too. So we're glad you're here. And today we're going to talk about Whole30 and Paleo kind of like combined. So we're going to hit on both of those in general, and we're just going to dive a little deeper into what's going on, why they work, why they don't work, why they may be helpful for some people and not others, and what you want to look for and pay attention to. You want to start?
Yeah. So I get lots and lots of questions about different types of diets, and even specifically, like I would say probably my two biggest ones that I get are like gluten-free, dairy-free when it comes to diets. And so Whole30 and Paleo are definitely different diet trends, but they're both pretty similar. There are definitely a lot of similarities. And one thing that I do like about both of them is that they take a whole food approach. So you are cutting out processed foods, you're cutting out vegetable oils, and from there, you're focusing on putting in whole foods. And so with that being said, like, I think that that is a very big positive of both Whole30 and Paleo. Yeah. And what I've heard, so Dr. Heather and I both work with moms, busy women, like not women who are just kind of like sitting around waiting to see what they're going to eat next or like spending millions of hours in the kitchen. And so from there, like from the taking out processed foods, taking out vegetable oils, Whole30 and Paleo both also take out a lot of other things, like a lot of other food groups. And so in my personal opinion, that is the like super quick downside of each of those diets, is that they become very hard to follow long-term. So I'll start with Paleo. I've actually done Paleo in the past for decently long periods of time, in my opinion, like a few months at a time, not for years and years, like I've seen other people do. But I would say with Paleo, some of the things that I do think are really positive is that there is a big focus on quality with food. And like I said, you're taking out the processed foods. There's really no room for anything processed in Paleo. And then when you're taking out grains, just totally taking out grains, you're getting rid of a lot of pesticides. You're getting rid of a lot of calories that are kind of more of like the empty calories. And you're definitely like much more likely to lose weight on a diet like Paleo, because honestly, it's hard to eat. Like it's hard to eat enough. And so when you start to take out, especially if you come from, so I've done Paleo a couple times in my life. I did Paleo, like my husband and I, back when we just kind of ate whatever, like we decided we were going to do Paleo. And I remember us being like, we're going to die. Like we only can eat carrots. This is terrible. Like we were so hungry. Yeah. And then we did Paleo like a few years later when we already were normally like eating whole foods and things like that. And it just wasn't as big of a deal. It was like, okay, like this, we can do this. We're mostly just taking out dairy. So with that being said, I think that like the focus on quality of food is really good. The focus on getting like fruits and root veggies as your carbs, I think those are really good things. I also think that there are some negative sides to Paleo though. And one of the big ones for me is just that when you are busy and when you are out, it's hard to find food that you can eat that doesn't contain any dairy, that doesn't contain any grains at all. And so either you have to be flexible in your Paleo, or you can't eat. And so a lot of people I see are more of like the rule followers, like the on or off the wagon. And so when you're super on the wagon, you're not going to eat enough. You're going to skip a meal because you don't know what to eat, because you don't have something in the house, because you can't find something when you're out, or you'll just fall off the wagon because you're starving. And then you kind of like get in this mindset of like, you failed, everything's terrible, you're never going to have the success you want. And so that's kind of my like quick version of paleo, but I'd love to hear some of your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think one thing you mentioned that is something we're going to hit on a little later on, and that I know both of us talk to with our clients, is the whole thing with grains. And when you pull those out, how sometimes it's easier to lose weight, but you're also pulling out a calorie source. And there's two parts to that. Number one thing that can sometimes happen when we do pull out grains is and vegetable oils and processed foods, is we are removing some of those high sources of added like iron, added vitamin A. Like most grains in the US are enriched, right? And so when you are kind of like constantly living off of these, they can kind of lead to or be at, I won't say at the root, but definitely a component in specific hormone imbalances, especially if you're someone who's already who's like always suffered with anemia or like low iron, you've got fatigue, you've got heavy cycles. I feel like people probably watch both of us, and while we talk, we're like writing things down because we're like, oh, let's hit on that. Let's hit on that.
Yeah. For later.
Yes. So that's another thing that I, sometimes like, because it is good to reduce those when we can. And then you're replacing them with some of these more bioavailable like nutrients. In a lot of times it's a very meat heavy way of eating, because that's one of the only dense foods you can get to keep you full, because we know that fruits don't necessarily keep us full. We know that, root veggies can for sure, but I found that when I've done paleo, I've just been like super meat heavy. But on the flip side of that, like you mentioned, I think there's 100% an upper limit to protein, especially for women. I did paleo mostly in the CrossFit world when I was in that world. And I can remember the amount of protein I was being told to eat to lose weight or to build muscle, whatever it may be. And that causes a ton of stress on your liver, on your gut. And then we also run into kind of this place where your body can only absorb so much protein at a time. And so when you're having, a protein shake with 2 steaks, or I see people do like a protein shake with, I'm thinking like an egg bowl with, anyways, they'll list everything out and be like, I just had 80 grams of protein. Well, we know that your body can't break down 80 grams of protein at a time. It really sits around that 40 gram mark per serving. Mm-hmm. And so it's kind of like, man, what a waste. Like, you're going to feel really bad, because it's going to take your body so much energy to break that down to then turn it into energy, that essentially we miss out on our body's favorite fuel source, which is glucose. And so we run out of your body really being able to use the nutrients you have effectively and turn it to energy quickly, when your body is spending so much time breaking down excessive amounts of proteins.
I would love to hear your thoughts on like that upper level of protein, because I'm sure a lot of women who are listening are like, wait, hold on. How much is too much?
Yeah. So typically in the weight loss bodybuilding world, you're told you need like 1 to 1.5 grams of protein per kilogram. And a kilogram is typically a rule of thumb. It's technically 2.2, but a good rule of thumb is half your body weight. So for the average woman who, let's say, is 150, she would then be told like, okay, I need between 150 to, let me see, I got to do some math here. Hold on, sorry.
No, you're fine.
So she's 150, so she's going to be 75. So 75 grams of protein all the way to like 115. That actually, I think, would probably be okay. I like to keep my people between like 80. Let me reframe this. I don't necessarily have women track, but if someone comes to me and they're having above, like, I say usually 140 is when I start to be like, we could dial this down a little bit. But I've seen in the Fitspo world, people all the way up to like 190 grams of protein for a woman.
Right.
I find that I feel best around 80. 80 to 100 is like such a good, easy rule of thumb. And most sources of protein that you find are going to be around 20 grams of serving. So, like, if you think about a chicken breast, if you think about a steak, like, average portion size is going to give you around that 20 to 25 grams. And so, it's really easy to have 3 meals plus some, adding protein to snacks or dessert, however you choose to do it, and hit around that mark.
Mhm.
But what I find difficult is when we're going above that, then people are shoveling protein shakes and muscle milk and all of these things, especially like synthetic whey proteins. That's a whole different story. And I find that, like, yeah, do you have a limit? I say mine is probably like above 120 for most people. I start to say, like, let's just pull it down a little bit.
Yeah, I think of course it's going to depend on the person, but I was thinking when I was asking you that question, I was thinking like probably anywhere above like 130. I mean, definitely when you're getting up to like 140 or 160, that's a lot of protein.
Yeah.
And in my opinion, the only person who would need that would be someone who's like lifting a ton in the gym. And that's not some, again, like that is like the not the rule, like the exception, not the rule. And that would be someone that I would only really recommend like intense exercise like that, probably out of your fertility years, honestly. But like, like you would have to be super solid. Your hormones would have to be super balanced, your thyroid, you're sleeping a ton, you have no stress. Like that's the only time I think there's
And
really
I
a place for that. And that's still a ton of protein, which causes you to need a ton of insulin. So that can mess with your blood sugar and like your energy and all kinds of things in your liver too. So
Yeah. And that was going to be my next piece was if you are having, so here's again what I experienced in the CrossFit paleo world was very, very protein heavy. So I was eating up to like 160, 180 grams of protein a day. And then my carbs were like 50. So you've got to have a balance there too, because then your body is just literally living off of insulin because you're
yeah.
using all this insulin to break down the protein, but then your body needs quick sources of sugar as well. So it's going to your liver and asking your liver to dump all the sugar that it's been storing. So then your liver starts doing that. And when your liver dumps blood sugar, what that means or dump sugar is that everything you eat, like your body kind of saves a little bit and says like, hey, this is for if we need it. This is for if we need it. When you aren't eating enough or your body doesn't have enough bioavailable, so readily available sugar to get to whatever your next meal is, or just to like make it through, it goes to the liver and says like, hey, I know you've been storing some sugar. Can you give us some? And rather than the liver being like, oh yeah, here's a little bit of sugar, this will carry you over till dinner. Your liver says, hey, here's all the sugar we've got. So you get a really big blood sugar spike and then a really big blood sugar crash. And that requires a lot of insulin to manage. And that is really exhausting, especially if you're doing this all day long. And that's why I tell women a lot of times, like, you are literally what, like, we think, okay, cool. Like, I'm actually not going to eat dinner or eat breakfast. And then I'm going to have more calories and I'll lose weight because I didn't eat. And I'm so hungry. Like, I feel so good. That means I must be losing weight. It's literally just as bad as if you ate 2 candy bars for breakfast because your body's going to it's going to release the same amount and you're going to have that same blood sugar spike and fall. And we know that that's really what is controlling a lot, not just hormones, but fat storage, which is something a lot of times when we're entering these diets, we're trying to work on. So yeah, we could go deep there. But I would say that's a big thing. And then the other thing I wrote down was on and off the wagon, because I think that the whole point, the whole goal of doing a diet to get healthy, if we're truly, our goal is to get healthy, then it should be to build resilience. And what that means is that you don't have to be perfect. If you are doing anything that requires your perfection for you to see results, then you're basically just damaging your metabolism and damaging your body. Because a body that's truly healthy is one that can handle pretty big fluctuations in your calorie intake, in your immunity, in your sleep, and still function well. And
Mhm.
so if your body is at this place where like you are off the wagon and you feel terrible, it's a really good sign that you don't have any resiliency, which means that when the stresses of life build up, your body isn't resilient to overcome them without major responses. A good indicator that you're in this place is if you're hungry all the time, you always have cravings, you notice that like, hey, if I'm not on a diet, then I gain 5 pounds immediately, or like I look at food and gain weight. That's a really good sign that your body doesn't have resiliency. And it's because your body is chronically living in this state of like, nothing is safe. We have to conserve. We need to shut things down and hold on to resources. And the actual goal of health and the actual goal of eating healthy and building muscle and doing these things really should be to get to a place where your body's resilient so that if you eat, 60% well and your body's fueled well, then the other 40% your body is equipped with the hormones and the mechanisms and the pathways that are all functioning in a really good way to manage whatever the possible like negative effects of those other types of foods may be.
Right. Yeah. And even when you're saying that like 60/40, I think that like 80/20 is a rule that a lot of people have. But we are saying like there is a time of foundation laying that has to go in before you can get to this even 80/20 or 60/40.
Exactly.
And
Yeah.
so when I'm working with women on their nutrition, like I don't expect perfection because that's impossible and it's just going to cause that, you know, on or off the wagon kind of routine basically, but consistency is so key. So
Yeah.
to build that foundation where you're in the place where your body has resiliency, that is the time where you put in that consistent nutrition and that consistent sleep and those type of things. So going back to paleo specifically, like paleo can be, I think, a good template to go by in some seasons, but a lot of times I have found, and with the women that I've talked to, that it feels restrictive. And if it feels restrictive to you and
Yeah.
you're in this space of like feeling like you're on a diet and you have to be like very, very careful about everything that you eat and you can't like go outside of that and you can't get enough and you're skipping meals because you don't know what to eat, then that is not serving your health long term. So
Right.
if I do think that it's not always about like the specific rules of a diet, whether that's positive or negative. I think that some of it can be about how you feel as well.
Yeah. And how it fits in your lifestyle. So, I mean, the whole, again, like the building resiliency piece of it, um, essentially just being that the way you get to a place where, I think a lot of us probably, I don't know, this was my story. It might be yours too, Leisha, where like we know that person and it was like, how does she do that? Like, how does she eat all of that and look that way? And how does she, she's that skinny, but she functions like that, or she does all of these things. And like, we know that person. And if you've ever struggled with hormones, it can be really frustrating because it's very easy to blame our hormones and be like, well, I just have hormone sensitivities and my hormones are sensitive and all of that. And that is 100% something that could be playing a role. But I think that a lot of times, like to get to the place where you can be somebody who goes on vacation, who goes out to eat every now and then, who, enjoys life. I used to think you had to genetically be somebody that could do those things without gaining weight. And what I know now is that when you do have that foundation, when your body knows it's going to get fed consistently, when you're eating enough whole foods to fuel it, when you essentially like understand how to stabilize blood sugar and keep your hormones supported, then you can be that person that can go out, that can have wine, that can eat the cake, and literally nothing about your life change. And I think that is kind of that resiliency piece, that like building health piece of someone that's healthy isn't someone that's perfect, that only eats paleo or only eats Whole30 or only
Yeah.
eats whole foods 100% of the time. And it's even like, I feel like the percentages could go all over the place. Like I could go on vacation and eat 70/30, but as long as my body's getting enough calories and I know how to support it, then I can still feel pretty good, right? Like I know the
Right.
tricks and things, but you can't get to that place if your body is constantly in deprivation. And that's
Mhm.
why we're kind of walking around some of these different diet trends. And I'd say that's probably our underlying piece of all of them is that the specifics can be beneficial at times, cannot be beneficial at times. But overall, if they're keeping you in a deficit, they are probably jacking up your hormones.
Yeah.
And especially, and I think again, we were just talking about like what weight flexibility looks like and why weight management isn't a bad thing. But there's a way to get to a place where you can decide, like, hey, it's swimsuit season, I'm going to lose 5 pounds or 10 pounds or whatever it is, and take a very intentional marginal effort, and your body respond really well to that. And if you're not in that place, again, it's a pretty good sign that you don't have that resiliency, and your body's just needing more and more foundations for longer to get to that place. So it is possible, it's on the other side. But my belief is that you never get there by following the calories in, calories out equation, by being perfect with excluding specific food groups. You only get there by building true health and knowing how to support your body with consistency long term to have a
Yeah.
really good picture.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love what you said about that. It's not that that person just has better genes than you. And like, they're always going to be that way. And you're always going to be this way. And even I also really dislike when people tell me, like I had a friend actually tell me this last night, and I loved her and I encouraged her against this thought, but she was like, oh, I'm 40 now. So I'm just like, I can't lose weight anymore. And it's like, our metabolisms don't have to be in the toilet just because we're over 30 or 40 or 50. Like,
Yeah.
yes, there's been stress on your body that has caused your metabolism to slow down, but that doesn't mean you're just like there till you die. So I just want to encourage you in that too. If you've maybe like had that thought that it's just your genes or it's just your age, like your body can build that resiliency back kind of wherever you are. There's a lot of hope there.
And then a
So
lot of times it's that metabolism, it's that you've spent 20 years beating your metabolism down or
yeah,
increasing inflammation. So I think that, is that where you were going to go? I was going to say, like, what if, like, let's hit on the person that's like, hey, but we know inflammation is bad, and Whole30 and Paleo tell us that it will decrease all inflammation in our body. What do we say to that person?
yeah. I think that there's some truth to that, because if you're coming from eating crap
Mhm.
and you go to eating paleo or Whole30, again, you're going to be switching to whole foods. You're going to be switching away from inflammatory oils, inflammatory grains, added iron, like all of those things. Yeah, you're going to reduce some inflammation. And so that is a good thing. And if you end up in that place where you're like, okay, I'm doing Whole30 for 30 days. And then when you get done, you're like, well, that sucked. And that was really restrictive. So I definitely can't do that for my whole life. So I'm just going to go back to what I was doing. That like yo-yo up and down. I don't think that that decreases inflammation long-term by any means.
Yeah.
So I think that that actually can probably add more stress to the body. So I do think that there are some anti-inflammatory effects to those diets,
Mhm.
but if they're causing stress on your body because you're not getting enough food, or because you're like, I mean, getting enough food, I feel like that's the biggest negative in my mind. And then there are some things that I think, specifically paleo, if you go like all the way from a lot of grains and then you go all the way to a lot of grain replacement products that are like all made of nuts.
Nice.
And
Yeah.
also if the nut quality isn't good,
Yeah.
then I feel like that can be inflammatory in its own way as well, just kind of depending on what you have going on in your gut and your body. And I do think that your gut is a huge place, like has a huge place in that too. So it's not just that the food is inflammatory, but it's how your body is specifically reacting as well.
Yeah. When people talk about things being inflammatory or not, like, should I decrease gluten? Should I decrease dairy? A lot of times I think we're getting so specific on what is the exact food I need I have an allergen to, what's the exact food I'm sensitive to, and then how do I get rid of it, and what do I do? And that's why Whole30 can be really appealing, because people are like, well, I have a sensitivity to this, so I'm going to do Whole30 to see what to do next. And I like to just encourage people that the overall environment matters. It's not just the specific foods. And so I think a lot of times we like pull out the foods, but we don't have a plan of how we're going to fix the environment. So then we just think we're sensitive to these foods our whole life, and your body should be able to tolerate a lot of things. And if it's not, and you've got all of these, issues, then that's a really good time to look at the environment. When I say the environment of your gut, I mean things like the bacteria balance. We were just talking about digestion. So like, how is your food being digested? Do you have adequate pH to do that? What are your stress levels? I talk a ton about cortisol repatterning, because if your cortisol patterns are off and you've got cortisol overnight, then your gut is getting ready to be leaky if it's not already. And that's going to cause a lot of sensitivity. Same thing with metabolism. If your metabolism is in conservation mode and your body is having to go find nutrients and resources in these places where it's been storing them long term, it's going to utilize things like the mucous membranes that line your gut. So again, you're like headed towards some issues. And so when we think about like gluten and dairy, a big one is gluten pulling out, and it can be inflammatory to some people. I don't think it's inflammatory to the amount of people that think they have a gluten sensitivity. And then with dairy, I feel like dairy is 90% a quality issue. And same thing with paleo too, and Whole30, because if you're switching to whole foods, that's amazing. Like you could see some changes and some progress there, because I will say that what we were kind of talking about, the vegetable oils and the added chemicals and the preservatives, these are all things that are potentially more inflammatory than other foods. But if you're switching to a ton of meat and it's not grass fed, it's grain fed, it's not organic, it's, you know, the cheapest thing you can find at Walmart, because you've got to get a ton of it, you've got to eat that 180 grams of protein a day, then you are essentially getting even more of these kind of inflammatory pieces to your food. Same thing with like, there's a huge difference between Kraft singles and a raw organic grass-fed cheese. And I'm somebody I like to be so practical. I am very, very not bougie. I don't even buy my vegetables organic. I'll be totally honest here. However, when it comes to dairy products and meat, I find that is so, so important, because you will not get the same positive anti-inflammatory pro-metabolic effect. And that just means like getting your metabolism out of that conservation mode from just like guzzling a bunch of processed meat and dairy because it fits the protocol. And I would also say that if you think you need to cut out dairy and gluten in general, I would maybe consider, depending on your severity and what your symptoms are, but a lot of times with my clients, I have them consider utilizing high quality instead and cutting out some of those low, high sugar, high processed forms. So I'll have somebody take out, yogurt, their 0 calorie, 000 yogurt, and instead have them bring in raw cheese and see is it truly a dairy issue, or is it more of an environment and the quality of a food versus a specific food group you've got to get rid of.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think that that's something that I hadn't even like thought to touch on, but you're so right. Like with dairy and with any food, if you're switching away from processed foods, but you're switching to low quality whole foods, I honestly would still think it's better. But I mean, you could still be getting, again, like with that meat, when we're talking about especially beef, if those cows are given a bunch of antibiotics and hormones and they're fed grains with GMOs and pesticides, then you're getting like the bioconcentration of that in your meat. And so with that being said, like I am also not super bougie and I like to be practical with my food. And so I'm not trying to tell you like, don't eat anything unless it's organic, because again, I want you to eat. Like I want you to eat, but that is really important. And there are choices that you can make that are going to be better than others without having to slip into that perfection mindset. So tell me, like, let's talk a little bit about Whole30, because that is a little bit different. And I feel like people mostly, at least in my observation, has been people mostly do Whole30 as like a 30-day thing, not like paleo. Sometimes people will do paleo for 10 years. And so Whole30, like, what's your take on that being kind of like a reset, or like, tell me what you think.
So we're going to hit on that, but let me say too, because I hear what, like when you were mentioning that, about organic versus whole foods and stuff, we should have prefaced this for the whole thing. Hear us in that, like, we are diving into the ins and outs of specific topics But this is all stages. So like my journey started with more whole foods, very similar to Alicia's, and then kind of looking at quality of those whole foods and then overall calories. So hear us in that we are just kind of giving you some pieces of information, but your journey and where you're at and what may be the biggest bang for your buck change for you right now in this season may be different. It may not be going straight to organic, grass-fed, raw. And that is where I actually talked about this on Instagram today. That is where having somebody who is an expert that can come in and kind of come alongside you, you're not just piecing together a bunch of random facts you hear from the internet. That's where you get the power of going through somebody's method who can say like, okay, if you're here, this is your next step, or having that personalized like one-on-one way to say like, this is your next biggest bang for your buck. Don't get caught up in the noise of you have to do all of these other things the right way. Hopefully. Okay. Sorry, did you have something else?
No,
Okay.
I agree with you.
Yeah. So thinking about Whole30 and what was your specific, why it's not a good way to detox? Is that what you asked?
No, I was just saying, since Whole30, like Whole30 is much more like sugar restrictive
Oh,
than
yes.
paleo,
Yes.
but you can have potatoes, which technically you can't have with paleo. Like there's just
Yeah.
in my opinion, like a few differences that make it very obvious.
Yeah.
But my biggest difference that I see is that people normally will do Whole30 for a shorter amount of time.
Yeah.
Like it's not necessarily meant to be a lifestyle Whole30.
Yeah.
It's more of like you do the January or the September Whole30, and then you kind of like go back, but usually you're trying to lose some weight, trying to like detox, clean up your diet. And then again, like I think most of the time people will kind of go back to eating how they were before and just kind of fall back into that. So I'm just curious what your thoughts are.
So I feel like there's so many different angles we could go here. One of them being the sugar issue. Because when you take away sugar, yeah, you'll get over the hump at around 3 days where your body's like not really like craving it anymore. However, you're activating your craving center in your brain like crazy, because we're talking about how sugar is your body's like most bioavailable and preferred source of fuel and energy. So when it's taken away completely, then that's where we can run into some issues with the craving center gets upregulated. Your body starts going into that conservation mode. Yes, you may be decreasing inflammation. However, long term, are you coming out in a better spot after 30 days or not? And I think that's also another piece to this is you're going in and you're going hard. You're sprinting, right? You're doing a sprint for 30 days. And I think the main thing is just thinking about like, what is your true goal of doing this? And what are you really wanting on the outside? If you're really wanting your body to detox, why don't you just learn how to support detox every day? If you're truly wanting your body to have less inflammation, what if we essentially just did like a trial of pulling out some of the most inflammatory foods in your diet and swapping them with something else? If you're wanting to lose weight, Whole30 is very much still focusing on the concept of calories in versus calories out is how you get to weight loss. I don't necessarily believe in that equation. I think that, yeah, I mean, you could scientifically say it's right, but you guys will hear me say this all the time. If you put 50 miles worth of gas into a car, it would cost you like $100 these days. But if you put it in there, then you could assume the car is going to drive 50 miles. But it won't if it's got 4 flat tires. And it's the exact same way. Reducing how our bodies work to calories in, calories out is, in my opinion, so not accurate, but it's what we're taught. And when it comes to hormone health, this is huge. We know this isn't the case. Pregnancy is a great example of that. There are specific hormones that will influence weight and fat storage accumulation, regardless of calories in, calories out. And so if we believe okay, I can still gain weight even if I'm not eating in excess of calories, then we have to believe I can still lose weight even if I'm not eating a deficiency of calories. And I find that women especially struggle with this. We will always believe that our body will gain weight even if we don't eat enough. And we really struggle to believe that our body could lose weight even if we don't deprive ourselves. So I think that's a huge piece of the Whole30. The other thing that Whole30 does, it is really specific on rules. Which I find isn't always great for a lot of my clients. And that's a lot of times how my clients get in there. But when we give our metabolism these like sprints, it actually shocks our body a little bit, which can sometimes be beneficial, but for most of us, there's enough going on that our body just needs consistency. Most of us are not consistent enough that when our body goes through these periods of restriction, not restriction, restriction, not restriction, it essentially starts keeping that metabolism turned down. It starts telling our body to hold on. It starts blunting our stress response, meaning that our female hormones aren't getting priority anymore. Our stress hormones are. And that's, to me, just not ever the outcome we truly want. And it's not helping you to be weight flexible long term. It's not really supporting your hormones long term. It's kind of jacking up your mindset a little bit because you think you just need to power through and do something. And a lot of times it's not really practical and sustainable with what like everyday life looks like. So I'd rather you learn the skills of what is Whole30 working off of that's beneficial and
Mhm.
carry that through long term than just sprint at something for 30 days and then be done with it and your metabolism be in a much worse place. So then after the 30 days, you're more likely to gain more than you would even try to lose in the first place.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's like a perfect way to wrap up, honestly, with both Whole30 and Paleo. And what I would say about both of them is that for most people going on those diets, there are a lot of rules, there are a lot of restrictions, and it is all about like, what can I have versus what can't I have? And not even about like, what is good for my body? Like, what does my body need? It's more about like, what my body shouldn't have or can't have. And again, I just maybe be scrolling. Hold on. You go ahead.
Okay. No, and I think that the biggest piece of all of that really is understanding your body. And so I feel like if you are doing something, a diet, 30 days of an experiment of changing out a food or restricting a food, whatever it may be, I really feel like it should be with the goal to learn something. So to learn how your body tolerates something or to really have that targeted specific outcome you're looking for. And when that's the case, changing a whole bunch of things all at once and restricting everything all at once is just going to make things even more complicated and confusing. So I definitely encourage you to evaluate what you're actually looking for on the other side of either one of these strategies. Figure out how are you going to build that resiliency and flexibility in your body while you essentially like utilize them. And then I'm always going to tell you to dive deeper. So if there's something that's just so attracting about these that you really feel like is going to be something that works for you, figure out why. What is at the root of why that may or may not work? And then how can you take that principle alone and apply that to your nutrition strategy versus having to follow a specific meal plan with specific recipes. One thing about Whole30 that makes me so annoyed is they say like, don't even eat foods that feel like dessert. Like, why not? like why? I mean, it drives me
Right.
crazy. So again, take the
Yeah.
principles, look, it really is about going to the root cause of why you're doing it and the root cause of why the diet may or may not work. And then pairing up, how can I pull the best pieces of this and individualize it for me? And to do that, a lot of times you have to be learning and getting that education and walking through essentially a method. That's my spiel today.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that taking those pieces, like you said, and being able to just implement them honestly, like one at a time,
Yes.
so that you can be consistent long term, like that is what's going to serve your body best. Like a 30-day detox, 21-day sugar detox, paleo that you can't keep up because of your lifestyle, because of your mental beliefs around food, because of whatever. Like if you know it's not sustainable for you, I really don't think that even diving into it for a short time is going to give you long-term results. And so really instead just looking at like, these whole food diets that you feel like are going to give you weight loss or are going to give you detoxification, again, like what's the reason that you want to do them, and picking one thing at a time and starting to implement little by little will give you that long-term resilience that we're talking
Yeah.
about versus the short-term on and off the wagon,
Yes.
another failed diet in your checkbook. Like
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
thinking about that, I think is so helpful. And I love what Heather touched on earlier too, is like, both of us are here to help support you in knowing what a next step would be for you and giving you those action steps if it all just feels overwhelming, if it feels like there's a million different people talking on the internet about food, which there are.
and you're confused, like that's when you need support. And so both of us teach in our programs how you can walk through these steps. And we actually have very similar perspectives, but different programs, which is really cool. So we have options kind of like for whatever your lifestyle is or whatever kind of program you're looking for. So
Yeah.
I actually think that's a really cool thing.
Yeah. I love that. That was so good. And yeah, I have so many more thoughts, but we'll have to cut it off. So we'll come back, and obviously next week we'll be chatting about even more, but I just think that if you can take the pressure off of yourself and the timeline, then you're usually able to see what are you really trying to build when it comes to your life and your nutrition. And that's what we want to help you do. So cool.
Yep. Love it.
Awesome. Till next time. Bye, guys.